Welcome back to Historical American Girl Read-Alouds. We're going to read the final chapter in Kirsten's Surprise today. Before we start that, I want to show you a little bit about Kirsten's school scene here. In the Scenes and Settings book, this is the powder keg school that Kirsten attends. She's wearing her original Meets outfit again today because I don't have her school outfit. As I said, all of Kirsten's things are really expensive. I do have her wooden school bench, which is made to look like a big log that was sawn in half. It still has the bark on the outside and these little legs. It looks really pretty real, like a big log of wood cut in half. And along with her school bench comes the little bucket of water that they would drink out of during class. They would fill it up from the well, and then they would each use the scoop to scoop out water to drink, because of course they didn't have running water in any of their homes or schools at this time period. You can see in the picture that they would have had a wood stove to heat the schoolroom, and I found this wood stove nightlight at an antique store somewhere. So it's not American Girl, but I was so excited when I saw it because it just looks like what's in the picture, a little bit smaller version of it, but I'm excited to have that in Kirsten's log cabin when I make a log cabin home for her someday, or probably when my husband does. And you can see in the picture in the background here of the Scenes and Settings book, here's another one of the tree trunk stools. This is her school lunchbox, I believe, in the picture. We finished reading the story about Kirsten's surprise. She and Anna and Lisbeth were able to surprise their families with a St. Lucia celebration. They were able to get the dress and make a wreath with candles and do all of the St. Lucia Christmas traditions that Kirsten loved in Sweden so much. So now we're just reading the back of the story, the peek into the past, that tells us more about life in 1854. And before I read that to you today, I want to show you on the timeline where we are in comparison with the other historical American Girl dolls. The earliest American girl is Kaya, who lived in 1764. Then about 10 years later, around the time of the Revolutionary War, we have Felicity and Elizabeth. In 1812, we have Caroline. A little later, Josefina in 1824, followed by Cecile and Marie Grace in 1853. And we have the focus of our story today, which is Kirsten. Kirsten lived in 1854, the time of the pioneers. After her comes Addie, who lived during the Civil War around 1864. The next time period is the turn of the century, 1904. That's when we have Samantha and Nellie. Rebecca came in 1915. Then Kit and Ruthie, who lived during the Great Depression in 1934. Next on the timeline is Nanea. She lived during the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. That event brought the United States into World War II, and that's when Molly and Emily lived in 1944. The last few historical dolls are Mary Ellen, who lived in the 1950s, Melody, who lived in 1964, and then Julie and Ivy, who lived in 1974. This timeline ends at 1990. So Kirsten lived about 150 years before Julie and Ivy. You have to go way back to 1855 to get to where our story takes place today. Looking back, 1854, a peek into the past. Christmas in 1854. A Swedish family at Christmas time, 1855, is what it says under the picture there. On the American frontier, Christmas was a time for special celebration. Settlers like the Larsons had a lot to celebrate. They had found new homes. They had good food, good health, and good neighbors. They were building new lives in America, including new American Christmas traditions. Just as people on the frontier taught one another good ways to farm, build houses, and care for animals, they also shared their ways of celebrating Christmas. Kirsten told her cousins about the Swedish tradition of St. Lucia. In return, Anna and Lisbeth probably showed her how they celebrated Christmas on their Minnesota farm. In the picture there, we have a family celebrating St. Lucia's Day. Their first Christmas in America would be a cheerful mix of old and new, Swedish and American traditions. For families living in frontier towns in 1854, there were Christmas fairs and dances, church suppers, door-to-door caroling, and moonlight sleigh rides. But families who lived on farms had to make their own Christmas cheer. Their celebrations were quiet because frontier farms were far away from towns and from one another. Their celebrations were simple because work always came first on the farm. Cows had to be milked, horses had to be fed, fences had to be mended, and firewood had to be chopped, even at Christmas time. Pioneer families like the Larsons couldn't celebrate Christmas for a whole month, as they had in Sweden, because there was too much work to do just to survive. Under the picture there, it says sleigh riding was a social activity as well as a means of transportation. Winter was hard in Minnesota, and the bitter cold, the wind, and the snow were always dangerous enemies. Still, pioneers found some extra time to make Christmas special. Mothers and daughters started to prepare for Christmas by scrubbing every inch of the house from top to bottom. They washed all the clothes and quilts and curtains and hung them out in the brisk, clean December wind. Cabins would smell delicious as special Christmas foods were prepared. Mama would have taught Kirsten how to make breads, cookies, spiced meats, and cheeses from their favorite Swedish Christmas recipes. Aunt Inger might have shown Kirsten and Mama how to cook a frontier feast of wild turkey stuffed with dried berries. Miss Winston could have introduced them to pumpkin pie and Yankee cornbread. By 1854, Christmas decorations on the frontier came from many different countries. Some immigrant families decorated their cabins so that they looked like their homes in the old country. In the picture on that page, it says, crisp, spicy pepparkakor cookies were a Swedish holiday favorite. You'll have to forgive me if I'm not saying these Swedish words correctly. Swedish immigrants hung hand-woven cloths in their cabin. Mama would have draped bright woven cloths over the rafters and polished her brass candlesticks until they glowed, just as she had in Sweden. German immigrants introduced other pioneers to everyone's favorite Christmas decoration, the Christmas tree. Children like Anna, Lisbeth, and Kirsten would have had a happy time decorating their tree with painted wooden hearts and little animals made from straw. They would have made ropes of dried berries, too. Sometimes Swedish families in America decorated their barns for Christmas. They attached a large bunch of wheat to a long pole just outside the door. The wheat became a Christmas feast for the birds. Swedish tradition said that a large flock of birds at Christmas time meant a good harvest the next year. and a good harvest was always important to a frontier family. Candles were too precious for pioneers to waste, but on Christmas Eve, a family like the Larsens might keep the Swedish tradition of lighting a candle in every window to show the way for jultomten, the Swedish Christmas elf. He always visited on Christmas Eve. There's a picture of him there. This time it shows me how to say his name as opposed to last time. Jultomten was part of Christmas for Swedish children just as Santa Claus is today. The gifts he brought to the American frontier would have been simple and useful. Perhaps there would be a pair of knitted socks, a hat or scarf. Part of the fun of Jultomten's visit came from the funny jokes, poems, and riddles written on the gifts he brought. Before children could open them, they had to try to guess what was inside. What do you think this present could be? Red and white, soft as kittens. These are for Kirsten, a new pair of... Frontier families tried very hard to get to church on Christmas Day. Services went on all day long, but snow, cold, and work kept many families on the farm all day. After their chores were done, a family like the Larsens might gather around their tree. They would sing hymns, read the story of the first Christmas from the Bible, and give thanks for the blessings of their first American Christmas. And there's a picture of an instrument that we saw last time from the Kirsten's World book, the solmoldiken, which was a one-stringed instrument, and the Swedish hymnal. That's the end of Kirsten's surprise. They mentioned in that story today that the Christmas tree was a German tradition and came to America and other countries in Europe from Germany. So in Kirsten's World, welcome to Kirsten's World 1854 today, I'm going to read a little bit about the types of settlers that came to the area of Minnesota where Kirsten and her family settled, because it wasn't just Swedish people. Minnesota's settlers. The Minnesota frontier was dotted with close-knit farming settlements of Swedes, Germans, and Norwegians. Yankees from the New England states came to the frontier too. They built new towns, taught in one-room schools, and started small businesses. In Kirsten's time, Minnesota was a mixture of New England, New Sweden, New Norway, and New Germany, right in the middle of America. Yankees. Minnesota's first teacher was a Yankee named Harriet Bishop. She came west because she felt she was needed in St. Paul more than in any other spot on earth. And Yankees would be people who were from the New England states. Yankees built homes like those they had left back east. Many had crisp white clapboard siding and orderly picket fences, like the one there in the picture. Germans. Kirsten had lots of German neighbors. In Germany, young children went to preschools called kindergartens, German for child garden. When Marguerite Schwartz came to America from Germany in the 1850s, she started the first kindergarten in America. So if you're in kindergarten, you have the Germans to thank for that. Germans decorated plates and furniture with brightly colored floral and geometric patterns. At the top we had a Norwegian cloth. Rose mailing was done by Norwegians as well as Swedes. Norway and Sweden share many traditions because the countries are right next to each other. So Norwegians are people from Norway. Norwegians. The church was the center of Norwegian American communities. They formed youth groups, choirs, and ladies' aid societies. They held picnics and served traditional Norwegian foods such as lutefisk, or fish soaked in lye, and a flat bread called lefse. Wood was scarce in Germany, so homes were made mostly with brick or mud. In America, Germans built their homes the same way. So you can see how that house looks very different from the house styled after the Yankees' houses in New England. That one has individual bricks that you can see on the sides instead of the wooden clapboards. Germans grew grapes and berries that made wonderful wines and preserves. And then the decoration with all the birds is a German wood carving. So many people in Minnesota today have Swedish and German ancestors as well as Norwegian ancestors. My ancestors are both Swedish and German as well as Irish and some other things. But that brings us to the end of Kirsten's surprise and this series on Kirsten. I hope you have enjoyed the story of Kirsten's first Christmas in America, and I hope that you and your family have a wonderful Christmas season. See you next time.
Och Siribrand körde i Bergalövsvala, alldom där den linden så gröna. Där fick han se sin dotter ungefär i riden så varliga lunden med henne. Och välest med valja nu se, alldom där den linden så gröna. Jag ser min dotter, hon kommer till mig i riden så varliga lunden med henne. Och Siribrand femnad hon kampen så blå, alldom där den linden så gröna. Där fäder hot vågar ska spännbarmen på i riden så varliga lunden.